With the release of Age of Overlord comes a lot of new meta threats that you should be aware of, so if you're interested in seeing what those are, then you've come to the right place. What's up guys, this is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm just going to be giving a quick rundown on things you should be aware of in terms of new meta threats from the Age of Overlord set, so things like new staples, new decks, and new engines. So if you enjoy this type of content, then be sure to let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. But with all that being said, let's just hop straight into it. So starting off with the new staple cards, of course the most important staple card that you should be aware of is SP Little Knight. This is a generic Link 2 monster that's going to be played in essentially every deck out there. It's just free removal in a lot of situations that power creeps the cards like the Nightmares, but at the same time can also be a offensive threat that forces interruptions out, or a defensive card that allows you to protect your board from not only things like effect negation, but also getting your monsters beat over by your opponents. Be aware that every single one of your opponents is probably going to have this in their extra deck, and they're going to have a good monster to go into when going first and going second. Next up is Superstar Slayer Typhon Sky Crisis. So this is also a very important monster from this set. And while it's not going to be played in every single deck out there, it technically can be, so you should be aware that a lot of decks out there will now have access to a card like this in their extra deck that can just punish you if you popped off in the previous turn or even during the current turn, because now there's going to be a slap this on top of any monster they control, and then that can essentially shut off some of your negation threats. So things like Baronne de Fleur, for example, are now going to be turned off since they have 3000 or more attack. But then also, as soon as they summon this, they have a free removal for any monster on the field, and they can likely beat over another monster. So just be aware that even though you may have set up a board, if your opponent sticks a monster on the board, it can still be kind of scary, because then it opens you up to new board breakers and allows some of their spells and traps to go through that normally may not have otherwise. So you should play around it accordingly. And then for the last new staple, it's going to be Infernal Flame Banshee. So while it's not very meta relevant at the moment, as soon as they drop a new pyro monster that's very good in hand or in the graveyard, a lot of decks are going to be able to take advantage of this because how easy it is to make rank 4s out there. You have engines like Super Heavy Samurai, for example, to go into this. Just keep this card on your radar. Even though it's not going to make a meta impact right away, I can definitely see this card being very important in the future, since it has the flexibility to both add the pyro monster from your deck to your hand or send it to the graveyard. Next up are new engines that you should be aware of. So the first one is the Horus engine. This allows your deck to have some discard outlets. So in Pharaonic Sarcophagus and Imseti, they're going to allow you to put cards that are good in the graveyard into the graveyard. So in a deck like Tearlaments, for example, you can discard like Destiny Hero Malicious, for example, and get a lot of value out of that. But the biggest value from this engine comes from the fact that as soon as you have Pharaonic Sarcophagus on the board, you have a slew of level 8 monsters coming back from the graveyard every single turn to help you make link plays, push for damage, or just go into Xyz monsters like the Zombie Vampire. So this can be incredibly good in decks that need to mill, because Zombie Vampire is a very good card in those decks. It can be good in decks that are trying to just combo off, so you can summon Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord to actually negate any monster effects your opponent might have, which include hand traps. Or you could just go into a card like Koshkin Giant Trainer to draw a bunch of cards and gain a bunch of advantage back as the game progresses. So a very flexible engine that, while you're not going to see in every deck out there, you should be aware that it is a thing, and these monsters can be very scary because they can turn into pretty much anything. Next up is the Dstar engine. So Dstar is most commonly going to be seen in a deck like Rescue Ace that can take advantage of the Sinful Spoil Snake Eye card that can act as a starter or extender in the deck. Be aware that Dstar technically can be splashed in almost every deck out there, since there are other Sinful Spoils cards that Dstar can set, while also just acting as an engine that generates a body onto the board or just more advantage through a card like Sinful Spoils 100 Fiend. So this is definitely going to make a splash on the meta right away through Rescue Ace, but just be aware that it is possible that other decks are going to be able to take advantage of it and just get a bit more advantage or extension that they normally wouldn't have if this engine wasn't out yet. And then next up are Ken the Warrior Dragon and Jen the Diamond Tiger. And while I don't know what decks are going to be playing this, just to name a few off the top of my head, you're definitely going to see this in a deck like Dark World. You could see this in like Warrior Turbo decks or Cherubini Turbo decks because they are level 3 Warrior monsters. But you could also even see it in something as crazy as Pearly to trigger off like the Dark Worlds that you're playing for your discard engine anyways. These cards are just incredibly strong because they can facilitate more consistency by allowing you to draw 2, discard 1, or disrupt your opponent by forcing them to discard 1. And in addition to that, turning on your triple tactics cards like Thrust and Talents. So as soon as you drop one of these, your opponent kind of has to respect it, because if they let it go through, then it doesn't matter if they try to play around them, because this forces them to use a monster effect. So it can be a very scary engine in a lot of decks out there, and it's definitely something to be aware of. And now a few of the changes to the existing meta strategies out there. The first one is going to be for Chimera branded. They get the new Baphomet fusion monster, and essentially what it does is on summon it lets you dump any fiend, illusion, or beast monster from your deck to the graveyard, and that pairs very well with the existing Chimera, the King of Mythical Beasts, because then Chimera is going to be able to bring back whatever you send. So that opens up some cool combos. You're able to dump cards like End of Anubis to bring back, and then End of Anubis can just be a huge blowout against decks like Tearlaments and Unchained, for example, just negating every effect in the graveyard. Also, you could set up a really nasty lock with a card like DD Orthros if you're playing the branded engine as well, because you have access to Albion the Sanctifier Dragon to give this to your opponent after you dump it, and then from there, it's essentially like a gimmick puppet lock for decks that aren't Unchained or Labyrinth. This is just another thing you should be aware of when playing as a Chimera deck. They may not always go for this, but they do have access to setting up nasty floodgate monsters that they didn't have access to before. Next up is Madum. So Madum gets a new level 6 synchro, which helps them with their sealing a lot and increases their consistency, as well as Samsara, which also does the same thing. You have new 1-card starters in Samsara. The level 6 synchro turns Riamheart into a 1-card starter, and that just means your opponent's going to combo you more often when they're playing Madum, and that's something to be aware of. You might want to change up your side decking strategy to incorporate cards that actually beat these types of combo decks, because quite a few of them get boosted from Age of Overlord, so it's important to have respect in your side deck, because these decks can just completely run away with the game if they go uninterrupted. Next up is Vanquish Soul. So Vanquish Soul gets 2 new cards, the first one being Jiaolong. Jiaolong is pretty good in the deck. It's able to search you essentially any Vanquish Soul card, meaning you have extra access to monsters, spells, and traps that maybe you wouldn't have access to before, because their old monsters were only able to search like one of each type. But now if you're able to start playing, then you're able to very quickly snowball advantage and make it very difficult for your opponent to break your board. Cards like Snow Devil are able to protect your board as well from card effects while also wiping your opponent's board. So they now have a very big blowout trap that they can search, whereas before their existing spells and traps weren't that big of a blowout and really were only 1-for-1s at best. So just be aware now they have access to these 2 new cards, which increases their ceiling quite a bit, and their end boards can be a lot scarier than they were before. Next up is Labyrinth. They get Arias the Labyrinth Butler, which effectively allows them to use trap cards on their first turn with the right setup. So you're going to be seeing things like the viruses be able to be used. I'm not sure how viable it's going to be, because I'm not sure how consistently they're going to be able to pull it off, or if it's even worth going for that. But just be aware that they do have access to this now, which can be kind of scary if a virus card is used on your very first turn, because there's nothing you can do about it at that point, and you might just have to accept the L. Nonetheless, I think it's a nice addition to the Labyrinth deck, and will definitely help make it a little bit more competitive, even though it's already doing quite well for itself. In the next section, we're going to be talking about potential new meta strategies that you might find become competitive once Age of Overlord comes out. And the first one is going to be Supreme King / Zark. They get a lot of new support cards, and while I'm not too sure what the deck is going to be able to do, I feel like they have the potential to be another combo deck that's a threat in the meta, because Pendulum strategies in the past have always just been very good at spitting out big boards, potentially going second if they don't get hit with blowouts like Dimensional Barrier. So just keep an eye out for these cards. They could make a splash in the meta if no one really respects the deck, because the boards that Pendulum can put up are still quite scary. Speaking of scary combo decks, TG is also another one of them that you should watch out for. They get a lot of new cards in this set, and it turns them from essentially unplayable to now a pretty functional combo deck. Although I don't know how competitively relevant it can be, considering you just have a lot more clunky cards in your main deck that you don't want to end up drawing, because like all the old TG cards that you play aren't the greatest cards in the world, and it's going to make it so you have a lot more bricks and more engine cards in your deck that prevent you from playing more non-engine cards that you need in this format. So I don't think this deck is going to be competitively viable right away unless someone discovers something very unfair that they can do, just because of how many bricks you would have to play in the deck and how the deck isn't very good at going second, considering it's quite fragile even when going first. And then finally, for a potential new meta strategy, we could see the Snake Eyes. Most of the time, they're just going to be splashed in other decks like some Dstar deck, or being splashed in a deck like Infernoids that have level 1 fire monsters. But this is an engine you should be watching out for because these cards are quite good. Level 1 fire monster you see here is going to be able to add any level 1 fire monster. That includes cards like Kurikara, Divincarnate, for example. So that could be potentially splashed into some other decks out there. But most of the time, you're just going to be seeing this as an engine rather than a standalone deck. And while it does give a boost to those decks out there, I think at least at the moment, it's not really going to do too much in the meta because a deck like Infernoid has still not really received its new wave of support yet. So I don't think it's going to really make too much of an impact in the meta, even with the new Snake Eye cards. However, I did want to bring this up because these cards can be quite powerful, and they can start seeing play if people figure out a good way to use them in some existing decks out there. So that's going to do it for this video, but before I end it off, I just want to give a quick shout out to Your Playmat and CardTrader Zero. If you want to get your own custom sleeves, tabletop mats, and playmats, use my affiliate link in the description below for Your Playmat to get 10% off while helping to support the channel, or use code SAM10YP at checkout to get the same benefits. Or if you want to buy cards online, but you don't want to pay exorbitant shipping fees from international sellers, then CardTrader Zero can help you do that by putting all your cards into one package and having that shipped to you all at once, so it can reduce costs overall if you're buying a lot of cards internationally. And if you sign up with my link in the description below, you get a free welcome bonus while also helping to support the channel. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.